Hi, and welcome to Your Prosperity, a podcast series on financial topics including tax, wealth creation, superannuation, lending, audit, and many other things that we deal with here on a regular basis at Prosperity Advisors. As with all financial podcasts, any advice you hear in this is general in nature and not to be relied upon. Please contact us for any specific advice. Hi, and welcome to the podcast. Today is the 12th of December, 2022. I'm here with Chris Smeed from Cubiko. Before we get into what Chris does and why I've got on the podcast, I'll sort of throw it out there that I'm going to have a bit of a medical slant on this one. So this one's sort of GP owners, GP practices, and the next few podcasts are going to be a little bit of a GP theme. So here at Prosperity, quite a few medical clients. And when you have medical clients, you end up mixing with other medical people, and Chris being one of those. So really excited to get Chris on the podcast today. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Mate, so good to be here. The December countdown to Christmas is on, so we'll sneak this one in this side of Christmas, which is very exciting.
Absolutely. And now, absolutely. So hopefully have this out in a day or two from now being the 12th. So it'll be a bit of Christmas listening for everyone, and hopefully get a few insights, I guess, into Cubiko.
Mate, Jingle Bells theme tune at the start. Yeah, that's what we need. So
we can edit it and put that in. Yeah. Chris, I guess our topic today that we thought we'd talk about is, how to improve your GP practice through analytics. To give you some credibility, which you do have on this topic, can you talk us through about your story? I think it's a great little story how you started and how Cubiko started. So for the listeners out there, give us a quick run through.
Look, it all starts with the fact that I trained as an accountant. So Brendan, cover your ears. I know it's a podcast. It doesn't make sense, but I trained as an accountant and then realized, oh gosh, I don't want to be an accountant. That was a pretty brutal realization when you'd spent that long studying accounting. And I live here in Brizzy, and there's a suburb in Brizzy called Anala Primary Care was the practice out there. It's a not-for-profit charity that does a huge amount of refugee healthcare. And so I went, oh yeah, cool, I'll go and work there for a year, give something back, and worked there as a practice manager, I thought, for a year. Never working in health before, which was a big learning curve. Bulk billing practice, doing a lot of refugee healthcare. And hey, I'm a total nerd. I'm a total general practice nerd. So I started building dashboards to understand what was going on in my practice. And to your point there, how to improve a practice. I love continuous and quality improvement. So I was building dashboards to try and improve our practice. And hey, when I talk about improvement, I'm not talking about clinical improvement. I love to call out the fact today that we're not talking about clinical work. Brendan's an accountant. I'm a business. We're talking about the business of general practice. So it's always good to put that disclaimer out there that we're not talking about.
You're not a doctor. Outcomes. You're a former accountant, a reformed accountant.
Exactly. I know my place in the world. So anyhow, I started building dashboards to understand what was going on in our practice. So we were taking data from our practice management system. At the time, that was best practice, from our accounting system, Xero, from our HR system, just to understand what was going on as a business. And one of the things I quickly learned, hey, Brendan, was that data's good and reports are good, but if you don't pair it with things to actually do with the data, it just becomes a lovely PDF. It just becomes a lovely, oh, that's nice. And I'm sure you've seen it with practices that you work with, Brendan. They sort of get a bit of a data report and they're like, that's nice. I'll just pull it out of my email or put it on a shelf.
Yeah, it was on the agenda. We've looked at that. What's next? Yeah.
Exactly. Tick. So eventually we built a product called Cubiko. And what Cubiko does is take the data directly from the source system. So from best practice or medical director, from Xero, from Tanda, and shows a practice what they need to know to be a more sustainable practice. And the college sort of reinforces that with the standards that, to be in business, to care for patients, you need to be a sustainable business. And we've seen with the shrinking margins how tight things are in general practice. So Cubiko makes awesome data insights that do two key things. The first one is solve your reporting problem. So rather than the practice manager or you as a practice owner or a GP spending a day a month collating reports, we've got it all there ready to go with your target so you can see what's happening. And the second thing is we pair it all with actionable insights. So things you can do with your data to improve your practice. And I'm so lucky to get to hang out with an amazing group of people building amazing dashboards and insights for general practice every day.
And you mentioned the reports, but probably I reckon there's a lot of GP owners out there who don't know what reports they could even get out of best practice sometimes. There is a phenomenal amount of data within that system or medical director, whatever they're using. Yeah. It's a phenomenal amount of data captured within there. But the problem has always been, well, how do you get that out and how do you compare it to other things and how do you look at it and how do you see what's going on? Because it's interesting you say that, you can get those reports, but I would bet that most practices you go into don't even know those reports are there. I think that's probably the key, is not only have you automated that process, but you've uncovered where the data is and what reports people can look at that they probably weren't looking at too much before.
Mate, so key. Like, one of the easiest reports to get out of your practice management system, and you don't need Cubiko for this, get your billings report out and see what did you bill last week. And say you built $34,000 last week as a practice. My first question would be, was that a good number or a bad number?
Yeah.
Getting
exactly.
a report out that says $34,000, it's like, that's great, but what was your budget or what was your target? And did you smash that target? Or are we buying a cheap bottle of red on a Friday night this week because we were well under that budget? And that budget might have been our profit goal. That budget might have been our break even. But one of the things is giving that data context and seeing how you're tracking time, year on year versus budget is where we sort of come in, because you have to smoosh that data together. That's a really technical term there, smoosh that data together. But if you don't have Cubiko, just work with your accountant or work with your advisor to say, what do we need to bill every week before our distributions and service fees and everything to break even? And what do we need to bill every week to reach our profit goal? Yeah,
that's exactly right. It's a great thing to understand, but you hit the nail on the head there. Is, you might have billed 34 grand, but is that good? Is it bad? Is it, you've got to understand what you're looking at. And that's an important thing to look at. I think driving that number too, I know you and I have talked before about, I guess, as a general rule, and I'll keep that very general, that not all doctors know how to bill that well, and most are pretty conservative. Most doctors get into being a doctor because they want to do good and help people, and they're not doing business sources. They're not that interested in, I'm not sure how that works, but anyway, here's the bill for that. And they click the item numbers and away it goes. Not that many doctors really go through and in detail understand their billing numbers. What do you find? Is that what you're finding as well?
Yeah. No, mate, I think that's a really great point. I like to firstly call out that every practitioner is different. And how they bill is up to them. And we really need to respect that clinical and billing autonomy, because they're the one at the end of the day whose provider number is what is being used. But what we found is that a lot of doctors and a lot of service providers were billing based on fear. They were billing, if I bill this as a level C, I'm going to get an audit because I've already done one other level C today.
Yeah.
And I know this is like slightly contentious, but I think as an industry, we need to get billed for the work we do. We need to bill for the work we do. If you're doing that work, if you're spending that long with a patient, if you're doing your care plan with a patient, and you're doing it by the book, if you're following the guidelines, you should be billing for it. Because
that's right.
what other industry would expect?
The guidelines show that if you do this and it's for this long and whatnot, it should be this schedule. But no reason to go a different one just because you're worried about, I did that, but it doesn't look right.
Yeah, exactly. If you follow the schedule and what's in your notes, backs that up. I think some of the most amazing practices we've worked with have not left their individual contracted doctors out to work it out themselves. Really great practices. What they're doing is they're pairing a new registrar or a new doctor into a practice with a senior doctor, because the MBS schedule is complex. It's a complex beast. And there's so much knowledge learned over time about it and how you bill. That passing that knowledge on is really, really important. And the other thing is that often practices will not get their practice manager involved in billing conversations. I actually say get your practice manager involved, because they're going to have the patience and the time to contact Ask MBS or send them the email or get something back in writing or produce a practice policy or provide some guidance to everyone who joins the practice to help share what's been learned. Sometimes we can all get stuck in our own little rooms and our own little offices, but actually how are we sharing that? How are we working together is really, really key.
And if you've got that one point, like the practice manager, say, or it might even be the lead doctor, but say it's the practice manager who's meeting regularly, at least they can say, hey, Dr. Jones might be thinking, that's all I can really do there. And she'll sit with the practice manager, and the practice manager might say, well, actually, you can build this, this, and this. I've been talking to Dr. Stewart, that's what he does, and this is why he does that. You seem to be, and the beauty of this, of pulling that data, that I know some of the stuff you can sort of pull out and is available in there if you know where to find it, is you can pull it out and go, well, here's all my doctors and here's what they're billing. Why is this doctor more than this? Why are these three doctors similar? And Dr. Jones is falling behind and is, did I use the right names there? I don't know if I still on Dr. Jones, but whoever it was, the right names, and is falling behind and isn't billing as much. Why is that? What are they doing differently? Who's not using these codes, I guess, or that's interesting. I would have thought they'd be using more of that code. We see the other doctors all doing that, either they're wrong. Yeah, and it's not about who's wrong or right, but it's like, well, let's look at it and find out. And the practice manager can be that conduit almost to chat to all the doctors to see what they're all doing, to give you some guidance there. And in that, Chris, I guess what's the big thing doctors typically miss? What are we, what are we missing?
I think one of the big, mate, look, I think it all starts with actually looking at what you bill per hour and per appointment, and what your throughput of appointments are per hour. So those three things, I think, give you a really quick snapshot of where you are compared to your colleagues and your peers. I know a lot of people get really fixated on billings per appointment. I'm actually a huge fan of saying don't use billings per appointment, because what is an appointment in general practice? Was it a 6-minute script? Was it a 10-minute recall? Was it a 20-minute care plan? So we find billings per hour and patients per hour is a great way to normalize what's happening in your practice. From that, though, we then like looking at the pattern of billings across the practice. And what we've seen particularly over the last 4 to 6 months is that shift from bulk billing to mixed or private billing. That has probably become the biggest thing that practices are looking at across their cohort, is that once they go through the pain of making that switch and bringing their patients along for the journey, how are we going as a practice doing it? And I've got one quick story for you, Brendan. We had a practice here in Brizzy, and they were saying to their doctor, who'd actually been there the longest, the doctor had been there for 26 years, that you are, I'm using my little inverted comments here, you're a terrible mixed biller. You bulk bill too many people compared to your peers. And that doctor was sort of just totally disengaged from a conversation about data, had stopped coming to meetings about it. Until what they did is they sliced and diced their data a bit more, and they realized that that doctor, having been there the longest, had the oldest patient cohort.
And what was similar about all 40 and 50-year-olds are now 60s and 70-year-olds,
Exactly. And they all had concession cards, and the practice policy was people with concession cards got bulk billed. And that doctor had disengaged from data until this very point, when they realized that basically everyone who the practice under their policy would be mixed billing, that doctor was doing, and was actually their best mixed biller, if that makes sense. So that to me was this brutal learning point, that data's good, but it needs to be nuanced and needs to match what's going on in a practice, rather than just this, run this big report and we see what happened, which was really, really interesting. Back to your question though, Brendan, sorry, I got a bit sidetracked there.
That's all right, I love getting sidetracked. That's what makes it fun.
Mate, get me talking about data and I'm just going to be here for days. I have to do a 2-parter episode. Actually, the biggest things that we find getting misbilled are the actually just missing billing, full stop. The missed billed or underbilled appointments that don't get put through the billing is huge. And that's work that you've done as a doctor.
How do you miss billing? How does that occur?
Yeah. So what we find is often that like visits that happen outside the practice norm, so nursing home visits, things like that, don't get put through. Mum comes in, also see bub. And then the big one that happens these days is often with telehealth, doctors giving patient a call, meant to be an appointment to talk about results or something like that. And it's not going through the appointment book, it's just becoming a visit, and notes are added. So it never shows up in the appointment book for a doctor for the reception team to know they're going to go and bill it. And so that's a big one. So it's just that little slippage. And you think about that 1, 2, 3 appointments a week, that hard work you've already done as a GP slipping through, it adds up over a year.
That makes sense. So if you go into the trial and you've got the appointment, but then actually while you're here, look, little whoever's got a cough and can we look at this? And there's obviously 2 bills there.
Open up the chart, put some notes in. Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly. So that's disappearing.
And the calls, you're right, with telehealth, and I guess, COVID probably improving the telehealth system in some way, as in the not so much the way it works, but that sort of process happening from practices where they'll ring patients, doctors will ring the patient, talk through the results, as opposed to, you have to come in and sit down and see me. You've really got to capture that. It still takes the time. They've still got to look up the records, go through the results, check the x-ray, check the whatever, ring up the patient. They're not available, get the call back. There's a lot of messing around. It takes just as long. It should be on a bill.
Yeah, exactly. And as long as it's done correctly with the patient knowing that it is an appointment that's being billed for, I think it's a fantastic use of that resource, because the patient is getting the full value from that appointment. So I think, that's what we've seen a lot of. The other one we see a lot of is chronic disease management, which is a big part of caring for our patients, really fell off a cliff for the last 2 years, as we were also busy getting needles into arms. So actually getting those cycles back in practice for when's patient due their care plan, when do they do their health assessment. I'm not going to say it's misbilling, I'm going to say it's opportunities that a practice has to provide amazing patient care that is funded by the NBS. Amazing patient care is funded by the NBS.
if they qualify, then it's generally accepted by the profession that that's what should happen. So you shouldn't feel guilty about providing a service that's generally accepted.
Totally.
That should be there.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Just when you were talking about the example of your doctor who was, been there for 26 years or whatever it was, and has the older patient base. I mean, in my head, I was thinking, surely he's got a higher level of care plans, because with age is going to come more of that. I would have thought that doctor would likely have more care plans as well. So that should have helped the billing, but yeah, who knows?
Yeah. Well, we were just looking at their bulk billing rate billing rate of standard consult items was the metric they were using there.
Yeah. What is that? Speaking of not doing those things, is that sort of the most underbilled items? Is that what people just put it down as they're essentially doing a care plan, but not really doing it like a care plan, but they're kind of monitoring the health of that person in the background without really doing it as a care plan? Is that the underbilled things out there, or are there other things that are more underbilled?
Yeah, look, I wouldn't say that's underbilled. I think in general, practices are really good at billing for the work they do. I think people don't engage with chronic disease management and things like that because they're scared they're going to do an audit. So they don't even involve the practice team in doing those item numbers. I think a lot of what we see underbilling is just not being aware of how long they spend with the patient and billing the appropriate item number. As long as the clock and the records reflect that, that's really important. Particularly with registrars, I know that when they join a practice, they've never been in a practice before. Suddenly they're in a practice and got a patient in front of you, and at the end of the patient care encounter, suddenly they've got a bill for it. And for the first 2 or 3 weeks, everything is billed as a 23 until someone teaches them how to use the schedule, which is pretty amazing. And when you think about it, it's probably correct, because doctors don't get training in how to bill at university. And suddenly they're in a practice with a patient at the chair next to them, and they've got a bill at the end of an appointment, and the next patient's waiting already, and the 2 after that are waiting. Just bill everything as a 23. So what I've found a lot of practices are doing is, as a teaching tool, using chart audits to go back. This point went for 32 minutes. We can see you did this, it had the complexity. This is probably a C with their supervisor or their teacher. That's a fantastic use of time and data to help them understand, because eventually they're no longer going to be a registrar, and they're going to be out as a fellow practicing in their own business, essentially within a practice. They need to bill for their livelihood. So that becomes a really important bit to understand how to use the schedule, but then also how to use the schedule to get those, exactly what you said there before, Brendan, those higher value item numbers that deliver amazing patient care outcomes. Knowing when and how to use them is quite a nuanced thing. And once again, that's where teams in practices learning together is really important.
So when you say teams in practices, is that where, like, who do you get involved? How do you get the team, the practice manager, how do you get them involved? How do you get the nurse, whoever it is? How do you bring them in? Is it simple as schedule a meeting? Like, what do you do to bring them in?
Yeah. So the first thing I'm going to say, and look, I get really excited by this, is make it a quality improvement in your practice. So a practice needs to do a quality improvement for their accreditation. Practice needs to do that for their accreditation. So make this a quality improvement, because that suddenly gets everyone behind it as something that they're working towards. The second thing I say, and I know I run a data company, so I'm probably a little bit biased, is share your data with your team. Because what we found is that often there'll be a practice manager or an owner that has all these reports that they can run, or they have a tool they can run once and get a report on. But how do you share that with your reception team? How do you share that with your nurses? How do you share that with your individual doctors? So one of the biggest things we built at Cubiko was the ability to share different bits of data with each individual in your practice. And you can control those permissions about what you can see. So in a lot of practices that we work with, the nurse has access to some dashboards we have around chronic disease management, but nothing to access about billings. And then in other practices, Brendan, they might invite their accountant in just to see the billings dashboard, but they have no access to anything to do with patient care. So you can really control what people are seeing. So everyone is working towards goals using data as its base. To get that chronic disease management up and running, what we find is really good is to pick one thing. Don't try and do the entire schedule and all your 721, 723, 732s, over 75 health assessments. Pick one of those awesome things. And I love the over 75 health assessments, because I like looking after our oldies, and say, this month we're focusing on this. And our goal is to take it from, we do 8 a month to doing 16 a month. And we're going to make sure we have the appropriate
database, the patients, looking at their age. It's all in there. You can pull that information.
Exactly.
And then it's a matter of, well, can we provide the recommended level of care as per the guidelines for these patients?
And do we have enough resourcing to do it? There's no point if your nurse is already running at 100% saying, and just squeeze in 8 care plans this month. You're setting people up for failure.
Yeah.
So being aware of your team and what's happening, and then never forget the value of your reception team. In this process, knowing Betty comes in every Wednesday, can Betty come in next Wednesday an hour earlier? Things like that, we just love getting everyone working towards the same goal, because it's much, much, much more powerful and often delivers a better outcome.
Yeah. No, look, it sounds logical. And I guess for anyone listening, the easy part is saying, oh, yeah, well, that makes sense. But then the hard part is doing it, actually looking at your data and doing it. And while you're mentioning there, you'd look at the over 75, saying you'd target that and you'd go for a bit of a run down that angle, looking at that. I assume then a couple of weeks later, all right, let's look at this. There's always something you can look at. And you get to the point which I love that you guys have this as well, because I've tried to benchmark data and it's always difficult getting information, but you have information, which is really great. So you'd get to the point where you're benchmarking that data, because I know I'll let you tell the guys about your benchmarking, but you can pull all that data, you can have it dashboards, and people can see it. They don't need to wait for a targeted program of let's look at the over 75 side. They can go, actually, we look below in these metrics, what's happening there. And you can almost start doing it yourself without that expert intervention. Talk me through it, because I love that data you've got.
Yeah. So what we did is probably the number one most requested thing in Cubiko was, I want to know how I'm going versus the benchmarks. But I was really worried, because every time I'd read a report about benchmarking, and I ran a bulk billing practice in Brisbane, it was just a national benchmark. And look, comparing a bulk billing practice in Brisbane that does mostly refugee healthcare to an inner city Sydney private billing clinic, it was apples and oranges. How was that even useful to what we need to know? So what we did at Cubiko is we made a product called Touchstone, and it's opt-in, which is a really important part of it. No one's coming in just taking data and using it. Practices chose to be part of it. When they chose to be part of it, they actually answered 5 questions about their practice that let us compare apples and apples and oranges and oranges. So where are they located? What's their billing method? How big are they? Do they have registrars? Things like that. So then suddenly now what we can see is this amazing data set. The practices that opt in to be part of it get to see not only where their practice sits versus those benchmarks, but where each individual doctor in that practice sits versus those benchmarks. And we all know that styles of medicine are different and different people have different patient cohorts, but just having that pretty broad stick is pretty amazing. So we've now got about 540 practices using it. So it's a pretty big sample.
Absolutely.
And mate, one of the key metrics that came out of it, and I think if any GPs listening, half of this will make them happy, half of this will make this sad. The average billings per hour in Australia, just that raw number. So we're not talking here after your service fee and everything like that. Just the raw billings for an hour in front of patients is about $326 per hour. So $326 per hour. It's been really interesting.
I was going to say, by the law of averages, you're right. Half the people will like that number and half the people won't.
Exactly. And we know there's so many different styles of practitioners out there. But that's been a really interesting one. But if you let me indulge with one other really interesting fact to go on with that. There actually wasn't a big difference between bulk billing and mixed billing clinics, which surprised a lot of people with what we've been hearing at the moment. They're like, bulk billing clinics must be a lot lower and mixed billing clinics must be a whole lot higher. Wasn't a huge difference, which surprised a lot of people. But the kicker was here, and I was going to
say, we did a lot of benchmarking too back in the day, and we'd find that it might be the bulk billing practice might be seeing 6 to 7 people per hour. The private clinic seeing maybe 4, the private billing or mixed billing seeing 4 an hour. But if you look at that key data, it's a great one to have, that average per hour per GP. You can have someone who's doing a lot of those quicker consults, bulk billing, churning through them a bit quicker. Someone who's taking a lot more time, maybe a few Schedule Bs and Cs thrown in there, but they take a much longer with the patient. And if it comes out at a similar sort of number, I agree. Yeah.
Well, it's actually 3.8 in private and mixed billing and about 4.6 or 4.7 in bulk. So there's about an extra 1 patient per doctor per hour. But as an accountant, I'm sure your mind suddenly goes to, say you've got 5 doctors in the practice doing 5 extra patients per hour over an 8-hour day, that's 40 people a day. How many extra car parks do you need? How many extra receptionists do you need? How many extra nurses?
I'll be honest, my first thought was, how many car parks do you need? That wasn't my first thought.
Oh, well, anyone who watches the profit and loss suddenly goes, well, all that costs more in our profit and loss. Suddenly our expenses are much higher because we have to cater with all those things. Like even just that extra receptionist, your wage bill will be higher. Things like that will impact a profit and loss. That's another sort of burden the practice has to find that overhead to service.
And I like that when you're in there too, looking at that data, it's all live data too. It's not data from the last year's reported numbers from 12 months ago was this. it's actually this month. Like it's literally up to date data that you're comparing. And it's not as though it's a static report. You can then drill into it to go, oh, that's interesting. And then go in further and go, oh, okay. So if we look at average billing per GP is below the average, why is that? And then you can drill into it more and see what items that people are doing, what you're not doing. And it can be really a lot of data that you're providing in there that you can drill into.
Yeah, we call it getting curious with Cubiko.
Right.
Because we don't want to just tell people what's happening. We want to give them a solution. Otherwise, I'd be a horrible person, just making everyone feel bad. We love it. And then it also then what you can do is each person can build their own dashboard. So what's important to one doctor could be increasing the amount of CDM. What could be important to another doctor is reducing their wait time, or looking at this throughput or anything like that. And so everyone's different. So everyone builds their own dashboard to know what's important to them.
That's right. And look, love it. Great product. And as you say, you don't need Cubiko to do some of this. You can pull the data yourself. No. You can get that information. So the takeaway is get away and do that. I'm sure you'd appreciate a few people gave you a call as well to get you and your business. As long as people start
tracking things and be aware of it, like that's the thing. You get a little thing. Our tagline is insight in mind. It's based on that old tagline, out of sight, out of mind, because you didn't know what was going on until suddenly you were like, oh, I was never aware of that. What's insight in mind is actually something you can do with it. So, but just if it's Excel, if it's a notebook ruled up and each day you're writing something down, just start being aware of what's going on in your business.
Start looking at data. No, I agree. Chris, really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on the podcast. We keep it short and sweet. So that was really good. Lots of good data there. If people want to get in contact with you, what's the best way? We'll put some stuff in the notes, but what's the best way? Email, presumably?
Cubiko.com.au is where we put everything. We do a lot of work on our website. So head to cubiko.com.au. You can find out more about Cubiko. You can book in for a demo. We also just have this awesome free library of resources. So your question about how do we increase our CDM, we've got a whole library of resources to help do that in your practice that you don't need Cubiko to do. Just awesome things to help out general practice on our website.
Sweet. So jump on there, download some stuff you got for free, and then, start tracking the data and enjoy that data journey from there.
Awesome.
Brilliant. All right.
Thanks.
Appreciate it, Chris. Thanks for coming on. If anyone else wants to listen to the other podcasts we've got out there in the series, so there's a few more Medico ones coming up, but if not, go back and listen to the other ones. Everything we deal with on a day-to-day basis here at Prosperity. And thanks again, Chris.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for joining us for today's podcast. Hopefully you liked it, and if so, please give us a few stars, like and share. And if you'd like to follow the series, please subscribe and pass any information on to your friends as well if you think they might like it. For more information about who we are, head to prosperity.com.au and follow the links.